Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and welcome to this event, which we've titled The Context for Art Practice in Turkey, Negotiating Patronage. Of course, the context for this discussion is Burak Delier's work and the exhibition, which is both in this space usually and downstairs, and I'm sure most of you have seen that. If not, when this discussion comes to an end, the galleries are open till 9, so you'll be able to have a look at the work. His work was very much the trigger for tonight's discussion, in terms of, in his work, looking at art, economics, some of the issues he faces as an individual artist, and how in Turkey there's very, very little state funding for artists, for the making of art, for the showing of art. And I know it's been an ongoing discussion for artists in Turkey. Where do they place themselves? How do they negotiate? Where the money's coming from? And perhaps how the money's been made. And it's a very sort of rich area of discussion. And so this evening, we've invited 3 people who come from very interesting but different perspectives. I'd like to welcome Övül Durmusoglu. I've been practicing. We're delighted that Övül is here tonight. She's currently on a residency, a SAHA residency. SAHA is an organisation that has supported, in the last few years, and has supported our exhibition of work by Burak Delier, supported the increasing visibility of contemporary art from Turkey. Yeah. But Övül is on a residency here with Delphina Foundation in London for the month. But otherwise, you divide your time between Berlin
and Istanbul.
Yeah. Övül is a curator and writer and has been involved in a number of key projects, including the last Istanbul Biennial, and was artistic director of the Sofia Contemporary last year as well. I think she's been involved in many things, but I'm going to leave it there. I'd like to then move on to Dr Andrea Phillips, who is Reader in Fine Art in the Department of Art, Goldsmiths, and is also Director of Doctoral Research programs at Goldsmiths in Fine Art and Curating. And in fact, we're working with Andrea here at Iniva on an AHRC-funded research program around Tagore pedagogy. But Andrea was involved in the last Istanbul Biennial, and I think has had quite a long association with what's going on in Turkey, and particularly interested in what one might describe public space and public, what can be public. Yeah. And finally, I'd like to welcome Fisun Güner, who is an independent art critic and writer, who writes for the Arts Desk and The Spectator, but in fact has written for many other newspapers and journals and magazines. And I think I actually had to stop the conversation earlier on because it was getting quite lively, so I'm hoping I can now generate it again. What we're going to do is a few minutes from each contributor, really looking at the title, Negotiating Patronage. Then we'll have some cross-discussion, but we'd very much like to open up the floor towards the end with questions, comments. You may have your own experiences. So could I first invite Övül, who in fact I decided had been in Turkey most recently of our panel 2 days ago. Yeah. So Övül, to start off the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really very happy to be in the good company of Andrea Phillips and Fisun Güner. With Andrea also, I had the opportunity and chance to work together during Sofia Contemporary, where she gave a very interesting and inspiring talk on what's public, which also sourced some other art events that's coming up this year in Bulgaria.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to point down this. Oops, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, that's how I'm trying to find out still.
Okay.
How we'll be able. So maybe while the computer is trying to solve this situation,
it's a bit slow.
It's a bit slow, unfortunately. Maybe I should start with a little bit of also my a little bit of my personal story as well, like working as an independent curator from Istanbul and having been working with many different contexts, mainly in Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and always keeping back and forth. When I started my personal journey, so to say, with contemporary art, it was not very easy for me to be able to go to the program that I chose, which was a postgraduate program in Malmö Art Academy called Critical Studies. It was under the leadership of Simon Sheikh, who is at the moment, I think, teaching in Goldsmiths College. And it was very difficult for me to find people who could be interested in supporting what I really want to do. Because this was a postgraduate program, it was not particularly either MA or PhD, and people didn't know what to support. But luckily, things really changed a lot lately. And this happened a lot. This happened especially beginning with 2011 with the foundation of the organization Saha, which means field in Turkish, which was founded by 9 people, including Fisun Eczacıbaşı, to increase the visibility of Turkish artists in international contemporary field. So, I mean, this is of course like the attraction of interest over Turkey's contemporary art scene as mainly developed over 2000s and onwards. But for many of us, as young generation artists and curators, our main education point was Istanbul Biennial, which started as an international festival and developed into biennial. In the late 80s, and afterwards, with every curator that was coming, bringing their own spectators, bringing on their cultural discussions, the vision of the biennial also expanded and also gave an opportunity for the young artists to see the methodologies, different methodologies and content material developed by the international other artists they don't know, and respond to that. But yes, so we have no public funding in Turkey. This has always been like this. Turkish contemporary art scene has been developed on families' money, private money. So in the mind map, hopefully that will come soon, that you will see different families being very involved with contemporary art. But these 2 main families, we can say the Eczacıbaşı family and Koç family. And I think without these 2 families, it's very difficult to think of Turkish contemporary art, because Eczacı family is the family who started Istanbul Art and Culture Foundation, the biennial, and also other people in the family. They started actually, Fisun Eczacıbaşı is also from this family. And Koç, at the moment, having been almost a sort of monopoly in Turkish scene, supporting Istanbul Biennial, supporting Turkish presentation in Venice, and also having one contemporary art space, having a scholarship funding for art students, plus preparing for a big contemporary art museum that's going to open in 2 years. But coming back to that, I mean, of course, I think Saha made a really big change in terms of the development of this sort of patronage, because what we can call it a sort of intelligent patronage. So it's a sort of patronage that's developed with questions of the artists, and they are especially keen on not going by artist, but really selecting projects. If you can go back to some of the earlier conversations of Fisun Eczacıbaşı, she says they are mainly interested as an organization, artists asking questions rather than giving answers. And she's especially interested by these many different questions actually posed by young generation of Turkish artists, as much of the conflicted and suppressed histories in Turkey are revealed in the last years. But I also have to say here that biennial, of course, now biennials are very big part of the cultural industry and spreading everywhere and almost replicating with a very fast speed. But of course, the thing with Istanbul Biennial that it was more of a need. Oh, perfect, thank you. I don't know what happened. So Istanbul Biennial, as I said, like it started more out of a need because if you have followed a little bit of like Turkish history, recently we were interrupted by 3 official coup d'etats, military regimes, which really devastated cultural life. And I think the main, of course, like the aim of the Istanbul Art and Culture Foundation in that way, with the biennial and with also other organizations like festival, film festival and music festival, was to regenerate this scene very particularly. Is it coming? Yeah, so for example, like with Saha's presence, like something important also happened. 2 Turkish artists, they were supported by funding from Turkey. And this was Saha organization, and it was one artist was Cevdet Erek, and the other artist was much more a historical figure. Her name was Fisun Güner, and also this support even went so far as publishing books, and I think this created an important visibility. Though some of the Turkish artists, of course. Artists from Turkey, they showed in Documenta, it was not that, but interestingly also, like as a cultural worker, partially working and living in Germany, I can easily say, this was the first time that the Turkish presence was like so clear in Documenta in that way. So at the moment, when we speak of Turkish patronage, you should keep in mind that there are, at the moment, registered over 3,000 collectors in Turkey. Not all of them are interested in contemporary art directly, but like they are collecting various objects and like various like old writing from Ottoman and things like that. But there are registered 3,000 collectors. And 200 of them are considered like serious collectors. By serious, you can say that collectors that are also devoting their time for like education, for further visibility of the artist, and for the further projects support. So, thank you. So this installation that you're seeing was like the Room of Rhythms from Cevdet Erek. Which was one of the, which was not in the main exhibition hall of Documenta, but which was one of the most attractive and most active installations for Documenta. Some of my colleagues there already know. And the other installation that I mentioned you about is like Fisun Onur's piece. Fisun Onur has been like really an important grounding stone artist for us in terms of like really developing installation practice. She was like the first maybe conceptual installation artist in that sense, and at the moment I think she's over 80 years old. And this was a new work that she produced, so she's still producing new work, which is an awesome thing for us. We are so lucky. And this, you'll see, like it's one of the like old works that was especially selected by the artistic director of Documenta. So when I come, yes, so you can see like our little family map, and then I think this family tree makes it a little bit more clear, because I know these relationships are very complicated sometimes to talk about when you're especially not part of the scene. But as you can see, like Eczacıbaşı family, like it's kind of very much related. You can see all the foundations and the sponsorship structures that's kind of going on in between. And of course, like when we're talking about collectors educational, yes, by the way, there is really like $300 million investment for contemporary, for art scene in general in Turkey, which is an amazing money. We didn't really like thought of this before. But which also brought like the education of collectors too, which I think this is an important, like 2 initiatives that I wanted to like attract your attention to is Spot and Collector Space, which was initiated by 2 different collectors and developed by 2 different young curators. And they are mainly interested in showing different collections from around the world and educating collector sensitivities in that sense. And especially with Spot, like the money that's been gathered from the collectors, like joining the courses are given to Artist Support Fund, like to produce new projects by the artists. And this is more or less like different galleries and like art fairs. We now have competition in terms of art fair. We had one local art fair. They had been a little bit lazy. So now they are really like trying to work much more harder because they have Art Basel Hong Kong like on their neck now, like doing Art International Istanbul from 2013 onwards. So I think this will bring also for the future a different change. But as you can see, the galleries are not only involved in gallery activities, they are giving some research funds, they are producing publications. And this is like a little bit like of the non-profit scene. Some names. So there was one more. Okay. Do I have the other one? Oh. Okay. So of course there is one more. Also, wait. Maybe it's at the end. Okay. There's of course like you cannot also escape the fact that there's Salt and Borusan family and Sabancı family. All these families they are running their own spaces and they're like producing this kind of network for the artists like to produce their work. Of course, I mean Burak Delier is an artist like he was like one of the first like to come up with collector's wish and like trying to perform his relationship with the collection system in Turkey. As you can imagine, with all these collectors like demanding new work, this also caused a big like movement in the scene. But at the same time, some people still think that we don't have enough infrastructure like to have this kind of really maybe too fast leap, and there are still many things to be developed. And in that sense, I mean, for myself, I see, of course, the role of the initiatives, non-profit initiatives, very important in the sense they're providing an important balance in the city. And I also do think that like there should be more like project spaces like run by like other curators and like really bringing out like different questions, because at the moment our scene is very much like ruled by like institutional structures and galleries, which I find which is very good at the moment, like for producing new questions, but I think in the long run we have to really create new balances. So this will be my kind of general framework.
Thank you very much indeed, and also thank you for your patience.
No problem. Thank you for your help.
Thanks. Okay, well, again, Tessa, thanks very much for organising this and inviting me to be part of it. I think what I want to do is just very quickly put the situation in Turkey in terms of its the financialization of art into a kind of broader context, which is both global and also historical. But before I do that, I just want to mention the obvious thing, which I'm sure many of you know, which is that the Istanbul Biennial that Övül and I both worked on in different ways last year was protested. I mean, the biennial is historically, I mean, as a member of the public of the biennial in previous years, I've also seen protesters at the biennial, particularly around the opening events. It was a much more dramatic situation last year, and that protest has historically been and was very much last year a protest. A very complex protest, but very specifically geared towards two things, I'd say. And Övül, I mean, this is me trying to learn about it as a non-Turkish speaker, so, you know, Övül knows this much better than I do.
Should, like, with this image, like, in your background.
Yeah, exactly. So this is collector space at the top of one of the main shopping streets in Istanbul. But the protests, really one could say that they were motivated by two things. Firstly, a direct critique of a kind of slightly confused critique of the direct role of the Istanbul biennial sponsorship in the urban transformation that is effectively wrecking Istanbul in the name of privatized housing, shopping, and other entertainment amenities. This is being done largely through the government-sponsored private TOKİ initiatives, which are new housing developments. It's a very long and complicated history. Again, Övül will be far better at explaining it than I will. Probably there are people here that know about it anyway. So that was a kind of direct critique of the biennial, but also a much more indirect critique, which was an attempt to begin to find ways to come to terms with the cultural the cultural financialization, or the financialization of culture in Turkey, and its relationship to the capitalization of the city, which is also a historic phenomenon. So it's not specifically around this biennial, but of course this biennial also was coincident with the protests in Taksim Square and Gezi Park. So within that context, which is very specific to Istanbul and Turkey, I'd like to just say a few things about the idea of patronage and the concept of patronage as a historic phenomenon, which I think, speaking from a Western perspective and speaking from speaking from the perspective as from an Anglo-European perspective, specifically within the West, we quite often get wrong when we look at places like Turkey. Because it's true to say that the Turkish situation, the sponsorship and patronage system that Övül has just described and illustrated with her mind maps, is the norm globally. Okay? And from the perspective of the Anglo-European, or even only European and even only Northern European context, whereby there is a relatively short history of state sponsorship of the arts, it seems to us to be a critical picture that we can't understand, because we have been conditioned by a very short period of time of state funding, which of course is now rapidly diminishing in the UK as elsewhere within Northern Europe. So in a way, the Turkish situation, the Istanbuli situation, the Turkish situation more generally, with the patronage of the arts being directly a patronage by rich individuals and rich families, is the norm of the ways in which art is produced globally. So I think that's important, first of all, okay? I'm not suggesting that's right, I'm just saying that is normal, okay? So I think it's really important when we have debates about patronage within the arts that we recognise that the anti-patronage phenomena that is often discussed within arts kind of critical fora is something that needs to be seen as a very specific phenomena that comes out of a specific type of political organisation that has existed in a certain place in the world over the last 50, 70 years. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing, of course, is to look at it the other way around, which is what does patronage do in the way it shapes, generally, and also specifically in relationship to Turkey and Istanbul, the types of art that get produced and get made. So Övül talked very specifically about some of the problems that occur, or advantages, one could say, in depending on which perspective you look at it at, when you have 300 active collectors, searching for contemporary art. Okay, what happens? What happens in the studios, particularly in a situation where there isn't an infrastructure of publicly run spaces, because there is no such thing as the public. In fact, as an aside to this, one of the things that we found really interesting, or I found really interesting from quite a naive perspective, I would say, from my part, was that when I developed with Fulya Ödemci, the curator of the last Istanbul Biennial, when we developed the kind of thematic of the public programme, and we called it Public Alchemy, we spent a long time talking to a very brilliant translator that works regularly with IKSV, the foundation that Övül has described. That runs the biannual.
This is the team that runs the biannual.
Okay, yeah, these people, very important. We spent ages and ages and ages talking with the translator about how to even translate the word public. Okay, so, you know, this was very important because there were so many different ways it could be translated. The conceptualization of the public that is endemic within the kind of psychopathologies of European, Northern European discourse, which is a historically embedded phenomenon, is non-existent within this culture, okay? So there's this kind of a really important difference that, you know, and of course, you know, it means that any Northern European person coming to a Turkish context and saying, let's talk about public alchemy, it becomes a kind of a deep-seated irony, of course. That was an aside. So what happens, what are the shaping factors of patronage in this situation where artists have this constant demand for product, okay? I mean, you know, I can think of a number of my artist friends who'd say, well, that's great. I could love collectors to come into my studio and buy work, but it has a shaping capacity. I use this term shaping, and in the idea of shaping that I'm referring to here, I take from a social economist called Saskia Sassen, who talks about shaping. The term shaping she also uses the term making to describe the coming together of a political mechanism and a physical mechanism and a social mechanism. So how does patronage make art? Okay, I think that Burak downstairs is beginning to try and develop a kind of discussion about some of these things in his works. You should go and see if you haven't seen them so far. So the question is, how is patronage a shaping... so first of all, how is patronage a shaping mechanism? Secondly, how can it be understood and how should it be understood as a historical and global phenomenon that the West needs to understand its claims about publicness in relationship to? And the third thing I'd like to say, this is kind of the end of my kind of starter, is that, of course, what's happening in the UK is that we are now returning to the patronage model very quickly and very critically. Okay, because the government is withdrawing support from the Arts Council in many different ways, and and small and medium-scale organisations, many of which I work with on a regular basis, are now having to spend 70 or 80% of their time, those workers that work within those organisations, trying to find private funding, trying to develop entrepreneurial skills, trying to find ways in which to cope with the demand for a return to the patronage scheme that is the norm, is the normative within the Turkish context. So I think that what I've tried to do is open out a context for the discussion about patronage, that we can place the Istanbul biannual and the Istanbul art scene and its history, the rapid development of collecting history within. Yeah. So, yeah.
Andrea, thank you very much. Fisun.
I found Andrea's and Övül's talk fascinating, actually, because they've given so much background to the situation in Turkey, and I didn't realise there were 3,000 collectors. that's
yeah, I said 300. There's 3,000.
There's 3,000 registered, but like
300 live,
really
active.
Serious, active collectors, like working for different stuff.
Well, they've also got serious billionaires in Turkey.
Yeah,
I mean,
huge amount of
it's
serious money.
Yes.
Maybe we should change places. Maybe
yeah, that would be helpful.
It's too complicated.
I hope it doesn't
we
die
have
on
a stage,
because I need these stage
performances for you.
Okay. My interest in Turkish art, actually, I mean, I'm Turkish myself, but I visited the biennial for the first time last year. And because I was doing a magazine, my background is journalism, I'm a critic, and I was doing a magazine feature, an in-depth magazine feature, and I was lucky enough to be sent off to Istanbul in September, where I visited the biennial, and I talked to half a dozen artists. And two things struck me immediately, because I normally write about European art and American art, but two things struck me immediately is that number of young artists. It's doing things. Number of young artists working in film and video. And I thought how interesting this is, because if they're relying on private patronage and there is no state funding, they're producing works which aren't, which many collectors actually, lots of collectors want objects, want paintings, want objects, and these artists are working in video. And a lot of video, I mean, a lot of European artists are actually stepping away from, there isn't so much of a concentration on video work anymore, but I was struck by how much video work there was among very young contemporary artists. And also the political situation, I got this strong impression, talking to curators and artists, that there is this sense of urgency about addressing the political situation and the instability. And I talked to artists who were responding to what happened last year in Gezi Park. And a lot of their work was directly addressing the protests. But actually, over their earlier work was had been tapping into those ideas, such as the landscape of Turkey is changing rapidly. I mean, the number of new buildings going up and buildings being raised, old buildings. People are frightened that it's turning into a new Dubai. And there is a sense that, we're losing the landscape of, it's developing so rapidly. And so artists have been addressing that as well. I mean, before the whole Gezi Park thing. So those two things I was kind of struck by, and I just wanted to go through very quickly. Andrew's given you a kind of overview of the type of works that artists are doing, and I just want to look at just the works of a few of the artists that I spoke to when I was in Istanbul. And I just want to see what exactly they're producing. So I'll start.
I think just double click on.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'll help. And we want to go that down there. And we'll. It's a very delicate operation, this.
All right. There you go.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. I just want to talk about the work of, very briefly, the work of three studio artists that I talked to while I was in Istanbul. And this is the work of an artist called Inci Evener. And this is a work, an installation work. It's this. This is at the early stages. When I went and visited this work, it was like a strange archaeological dig. I saw a dead tree, I saw a skull, I saw some hair, and I just thought, I can't work out what's happening, really. And she works with, Inci works with young students. Her work is very collaborative, and she invited for the Biennale, for her installation, I think you can read the title there, Co-Action Device, a study. I mean, she took over a whole a hall in a school, a former school.
It's important that it's Greek school, by the way. It's very important thing that it's a Greek school.
Okay.
Because it's a minority school.
Yeah. And she took over this hall.
It's a disused school.
Exactly.
It's a disused school. Yeah. And she invited she was working with 32 young students, creating a kind of performance arena, or a kind of utopian space. She called it an art school for freedom. Okay, so and I said, well, what do you do every day? How are you working in this space? And she kind of developed this utopian art school for freedom. And if you look at that wall to the left, you'll see this strange map And when I visited, a lot of the young students were kind of drawing things on this map, and I said, "What's going on?" And they were writing down, documenting their experiences of having been at Gezi Park and all that. And Inji said to me, you know, in 30 years' time, this will be a kind of documentation of how people reacted, you know, to the protest and their thoughts. So it was a kind of ongoing project, which I found quite intriguing. And do I do this?
Yeah, I think. Oh, down, one of them. Yeah.
Down. Oh, here we go. Her work is very ritualistic, uses lots of different motifs in a quite symbolic way. And in the middle of that installation, which you didn't see, was this dead tree. And I thought, what's this dead tree doing there? And it's basically symbolised the protest in Gezi Park, because it obviously started with, you know, her story goes, it started with one tree. You know, they want to raise. Istanbul is so densely built that Gezi Park offers one of the few green spaces. It's quite small as well. And that kind of symbolised that. So there are all these symbolic, ritualistic gestures going on. And you had to spend a lot of time there to get your head round it. There was a lot going on. But it was a kind of an interesting, she called it a performative research space. Very collaborative, very political. And I don't know if you've had a chance yet, any of you, to see Burak's work, but I'm going to look at an earlier work that he did in 2007. And when I talked to him, he talked about this work, which I found quite intriguing. As you see, it's a poster, and the title of this work is Parker Lynch Poster. And it's quite a witty take, using the language of corporate advertising to basically satirise it. You know, Burak created a fictional fashion company which made garments, and you see it here, made garments for activists. And during the May protests, he told me that he took loads of these garments to the Gezi Park. So, you know, these... so artists, you know, one of the things I was struck by when I was in Istanbul, how directly political the work is. And, you know, this was made in 2007.
For Istanbul Biennial, by the way.
The Istanbul Biennial, right, okay. Yeah. That's interesting. So, it's a very witty but very powerful satire. And it's intriguing that so many artists have been working with these ideas, and then, you know, it all kind of comes together, and there's a sense of urgency, you know, when we come to the protests in May. Yeah. You may know Halil Atilderi's, if I'm saying it right, work. Unfortunately, I wanted to get a link to the video. It's on YouTube if you want to look. This is a kind of rap video. It's called Wonderland, and he Altındere, I'm saying it right.
Altındere.
Altındere.
Yeah.
Thank you. Made this. He actually filmed this last year, just before the protests in February. So just a few months. And I find this a fascinating work, because he took these. It's basically, if you watch it, it's like a pop rap video. And this video is toured everywhere. I mean, it's been shown in London, in New York. And he took this group of boys who called themselves, they called themselves a rap group called the Rebellion on Destruction. And they're Roma kids who are basically rapping about the destruction of the area in which they live in, called Sululeke district. Sulukule. Sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. And this, you know, Sululeke it's a settled Roma community since the 15th century. And now it's threatened. I don't know what stage it's now at.
It was the first neighborhood in Istanbul to be gentrified.
Yeah.
And partly this school that these kids were educated in, they are like this kind of short part, like small part that remains, but the rest is completely residences, $1 billion villas.
And the artist said he wanted to make a film about this community for about 7 years, and he didn't really know how to approach it. And then when he heard that the whole district was being, well, basically bulldozed and rebuilt on, and it basically threatens this community that has been there for hundreds of years, you know, he went in and tackled it through a group of, I think, 5 or 6 boys, and made this rap video. And you can read, if you can read this is translated, you know, some of their rap. If you can see it, if you can read it, you know, it's talking about the destruction of their community. And
I'll read
it out.
No, I'm going to move.
I can read it out. I'm quite happy.
I'm going over here.
I've got it here. We're pissed on the foundations of the newly built buildings. My town will be torn down. Soon Sulilike will be a home to the bourgeoisie. It's quite a fast-paced video. And what's happened since then is that these guys have kind of, I think they've cut a record. So they've got a deal, and they've been doing concerts. So obviously, personally, they've benefited from this. But these ideas that Altindere had, you know, he's been thinking about them for a long time. And, you know, there's just, since the whole political situation has escalated, you know, it found a perfect way to express itself through this kind of, you know, quite a powerful video work. Oh, this is just a still from the video. Excuse me. I also wanted to talk about. Sorry, this is in my throat. Is that mine?
Yeah, this is yours. Yeah.
I also just wanted to briefly touch upon some of the street art. I mean, it's kind of unrelated, or it's tangential to the studio art and the institutional art that we're talking about. But I wanted to talk just very briefly about the street art that when I was kind of thinking about this talk that I kept on encountering, because excuse me. Oh, sorry, I've just got this. Let me just have a.
Should I put some more water?
I'm okay. Thank you. Sorry, I've just lost my thread. Because all these artists were involved in the street protests, but also the images that were made part of this protest, you know, were quite powerful and seen worldwide. And sorry, I've just lost my. One moment. Sorry, I just got to have some water.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've got a tickly throat. Sorry about that.
Do you want to draw to a close and then we'll have some discussion?
It's okay. I'll carry on.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I might come back to this.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I
Let's
think
go into a little
you
bit of
raised also a
discussion.
lot of good points. So.
Because I think what I'm quite keen to do is, you've been talking about the artist's work. And what I'm interested in is the relationship between the artist's work and the content of the work and the context in which they're working in terms of, obviously, Gezi Park and the political situation made public what a lot of people were feeling about what was happening to their city, where money was coming from to change the city, and both separately but connected, the artists are having to decide how they either respond to that, but also how what monies are they working with to make their work, and maybe who's buying their work. So what I'm interested in is the relationship between the context of patronage and the content of the work, and your comments on that.
You want to start? Yeah, I can start. First, I think I think we have to clarify this point that the contemporary art from Turkey has always been intensely political. Ever since, because it mainly started, there is of course this period that we see that's more like under spotlight after 2000s, but there's an important period that starts like with the 80s. And then when it's much more closed and when it's much more, the art is much more underground, contemporary art. And when collectors are not yet maybe that much interested apart from a few early names. And at that point, of course, like the response of the artist, we can say mainly Halil Altındere is really one of the first artists also dealing with Turkish nationalism and like ethnic separations and all these problems, especially going around Kurdish conflict. He and like a number of artists like that was kind of developed around him. They brought an important like really works, groundbreaking works. Also artists like, for example, Halil Tenger, talking about Turkish nationalism again, like how it worked through. So all the time, like Turkish artists are very keen on, what I try to say is like keen on responding to the political situation surrounding them. Of course, now like we have a lot of actually histories of all these ethnic complicities and all these problems that's been like swept under before they are much more revealed. And we see like the problem of the global capital and transforming the Turkey, or the way the government is using global capital in connection with different like in connection with maybe Gulf network, and also like to open open Turkey as almost like a kind of extension of the Gulf market. That's now, of course, that comes as kind of the radar of the artist, like to refer to like how this money is being used. And of course, now we have the institutions. Of course, the reaction also goes to, okay, where is this money coming from and how is this money made? And we want clarity with institutions. We want them to be more honest with us. So there's this kind of demand of honesty from mainly from activist groups. In this sense, we can say also that the Istanbul Biennial, maybe in terms of like a public discussion, I think it may be the same even like Sao Paulo Biennial. Like it's always like discussed and discussed and discussed and discussed. Like
always
so
protested.
Always protested. You know, there's so much public reaction. It's very much of the public life. I think it's very maybe rare even like for an art event like to be so public as this and be really part of the public reactions. So this would be my like clarification. I think this would be important for us, like to kind of shape a little bit now how the reaction is developing towards the art institutions, like the patronage structures, which is we can also connect. We spoke also before, like how actually it can be connected to discussions around Manifest and St. Petersburg, completely. Or Sydney Biennial's funding structures, and like many others kind of coming in line. So I think these discussions are not very much separated from each other in a way. Like it is kind of a general tendency that we are kind of doing. But what do publics now want after seeing all these transformations in public space, and how when they're transformed, they want to look their publicness in the art events also differently. So that would be the thing.
I mean, I think that there's, Övül, I think you're absolutely right, that there's I think that we can't separate a discussion about patronage of art from a discussion about the way in which global finance organises what is made public and what is made private. So, and I would say that artists in many places, I mean, not just in Istanbul, artists in London, artists in Berlin, who might be getting an exhibition in somewhere like Iniva, but might also be funding their studio through trying to sell. They might be represented by a gallery, they might not be. That gallery might have collectors coming and buying. There might be where the money is not transparent. So I think that the situation is important for all artists. So the question, where does the money come from, is a question that many contemporary artists are asking, and, as you say, have done historically. So I think that's the first thing that's important to say.
Going back to the point you raised earlier, where the model in Istanbul or Turkey has been ever thus.
Yeah.
And for us, it's moving more back towards greater, well, we hope, greater patronage.
Or not, as the
or
case
not.
may be.
Well, in terms of
Yeah.
generating activity.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in...
Or not, as the case may be. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we
Okay.
don't.
But I'm interested in what it triggers in the discussion and in the work.
Yeah.
It means that what isn't made, or whether there's a discussion of a different kind of censorship, you might not call it censorship, but what isn't made, what is made, what discussions become public, and they will be different because of this very history.
I mean, this is a very interesting topic. Actually, that's also caused. I mean, first of all, the Turkish scene is very small, and I think there's a close peer reflection, which you may realize. Everybody is like really closely watching what each other is doing. So there's really strong pressure on everybody. In terms of the censorship, everybody is very sensitive because of the military period that we had and how a lot of things were censored at that point. I think this is like a particular thing that where people are very sensitive about. But for example, what happened like in Gezi period was an interesting thing that happened around the very, very well-known artist figure Kutlu Ataman, for example. And he showed some different reactions, like he was not on the street like others, and he made some different public claims during Gezi Park. And also afterwards really made big also public statements about his collectors as well, Koç family, which some people see as like directly involved also with protecting some of the people escaping from police, etc., etc. So it's what he experienced after the result of discussions was a kind of almost sort of exclusion.
It was a kind of hate campaign.
It was a kind of hate campaign. This was also like something. This is kind of really particular intensity in Turkey. Like it's kind of this love and hate goes very strong.
What did he say exactly?
I mean, he was saying.
He was a bit more equivocal about the protest. Actually,
he was saying it was taken. At some point, he was thinking that it was taken over by the Republican people, not really the first group like that really started, that ignited the whole movement. And then he was kind of thinking that it became a kind of lab for the Republicans, like to organize their campaign against the government.
He was equivocal about Erdogan, for instance. So he was saying, I don't know whether he's such a bad thing. And in the context of Gezi Park, that was like
he was
lighting a touch paper.
sympathetic to the protesters, broadly, but in between the lines, he was saying, look, Turkey's a new democracy. Let's work with the government a little bit. I mean, that's what I kind of read. I mean, the piece he wrote is in The Independent, so you can look it up. But because he was kind of equivocal, people took that as, because discourse is incredibly polarised around this issue. Okay, it's on both sides. The basic situation is you're either with us or against us. Now, he called the reaction that he received from other artists and the artistic community, he called it a public lynching, and he completely withdrew from the art world altogether. I tried to get an interview with him, and I rang his London gallery, Thomas Dane. We no longer represent him. He kind of went underground, and no one, had seen him. I mean, I don't know if he's going to emerge at some point soon.
But because people expected really, I mean, yes, I also agree with his sensitivity at this point, because it went into this kind of now or never situation, which is always dangerous, of course. But people really expected him, who really made immensely important films for this generation, actually, who was a kind of main igniter of the movement. Also a lot, like responding a lot to LGBTI community, which was very, very present in Gezi, which was very important for everybody. They wanted him more to be there. I think that was just like this kind of this reaction that came from public. But for me, I have to say, as an avid follower of his work, what I found maybe not really equivocal in the sense that he gave these statements, I think with also a sort of fury to really government supporting newspaper, like very clear. It's a kind of clear ideological statement. Then it's not. It's about taking sides and polarization and everything. And of course, like as artist figures or people as cultural and artistic practitioners in the country, our role is not to take sides, but our role is much to provide like much more angles and different interpretations.
But I'd just like to return to your question, Tessa.
Okay, because I want to pick up on that.
But the question about what gets censored in the term you used, or not made visible. I think that one needs to look at that in the context of something like Documenta, whereby what is not made visible is that which the private galleries won't fund. So it's actually not about the content, effectively. It's not about the radicality of the critique, for instance, that's within the content of the work. It's actually who represents you and whether they're prepared to pay for your installation and the party. Okay. You know, and if they don't, then apart from a few individuals, you don't get programmed. Yes. You find yourself dropped off the bottom of the list.
That's not particular to Turkey. I mean, you can
I said Documenta. Absolutely. I use Documenta as the kind of mothership.
I'd like to especially Caroline's role.
Okay, but I'd like to, in terms of Turkey, and you talked about some of these families running museums, running various galleries, often through other people, but nonetheless. Is there a sort of sense of competitiveness between them as to what they're doing, one? And two, does that then mean that sometimes that some of those patrons are more liberal in the kind of work that they will support and be presented, or not?
Well, yeah, of course. Of course, but, like there are different orientations of the collectors. That's
but is it quite visible in that sense?
Oh,
or
yes. Sure. Of course, it's visible. I mean, I think what became clear, especially with the opening of the new SALT, which used to be Platform Contemporary Art Center, which was a smaller, institution, became a more corporate structure almost. That being there, it was almost like a kind of I see it as a monument to the transformation of the whole Istiklal Street and like how the whole street is kind of turned into a big shopping mall. Like it's very much part actually standing and like responding to this sort of reaction. And then when we look at the other art institutions just across corner, they are also very close to each other. Arter started to give much more funding, like to produce artist projects and like to put it on. But this, of course, like this kind of works a bit like they are like supporting young artists and like giving grants like to produce works, and these works are displayed, and afterwards they become part of Ömer Koç's collection. And then this collection will be displayed, as I told, in 2000. Actually, if we can, I'm a bit afraid, like to go to this one, but we can see also the museum space also because the first projects, the visual projects, arrive, so you can understand like what kind of public image that Koç is actually thinking of itself in that sense. So of course, like this is this kind of, for example, competition between these also two institutions. So now Arter is like giving more local funding, and like SALT is opening up for more international like audience. For example, recently they have Rabia Mrao's like retrospective, but at the same time they have also Christian Marclay's famous clock, which you see like in very major blockbuster institutional show.
But actually, just something else about SALT, which had this incredible. I mean, the first time I ever went to Istanbul was on an invite from Platform Garanti.
Yeah, sure.
Which was this kind of very.
We all grew up there.
We all grew up through Platform Garanti, yeah. But then the transformation into SALT, which no longer has an artist residency program, but is this very unfortunately, but has this kind of monolithic, these two monolithic kind of buildings that are old banks, because Garanti is a bank, obviously. But what's interesting about it is the way it plays the game of being a public museum with European institutions.
Yeah.
So it's part of the Internationale network, which is a network of institutions that are collaborating and cooperating about, you know, the resistance of privatisation. So there's lots and lots of kind of contradictions that are going on.
It has an important library, and it
yeah,
has
very
extraordinary
important library.
extraordinary resources.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, of course, like now we're having a little bit like scared by the whole building structure itself. Of course, platform, I think, again, like biennial, for me and my generation, it has been like the main educational space. We listened to talks there, we grew up there. I mean, we saw the first time, I listened to Hans Ulrich Obrist like first time in Platform Garanti, and like it was, I think it was a book launch with Martha Rosler and Anton Vidoklis. It was like next documenta should be curated by an artist. Jens Hoffman's project. I mean, there were like really important initiatives like going around there, and of course now it's been transformed. I think mainly it's translated into the research center, as you kind of pointed out. But the other displays are, of course, it makes people still like a sort of give reaction towards, because it is the most corporate, like facade institution in that sense.
I'm shortly going to open up to who may have comments or questions, but I'm interested in, for very young artists leaving college, what is their journey in terms of continuing to make work, beginning to be shown? What is the journey and what is the kind of jungle they walk through in terms of the galleries, if there is absolutely no funding to continue to make any work?
That's a good question, and that's a very important question too. Of course, when the gallery structure first developed, sprouted out, it became a good outlet for the young artists, like to gain more confidence about showing their work, because before, unless there are some like initiative structures that they are part of, it was very difficult for like young artists like to come out and like, you know, practice showing work in the city, unless they are part of like certain circles, because in that sense Platform was always an international exhibition space, and it didn't really involve that much young local artists in that sense, because the urgency was different at that point. Actually, like at the moment, like what is happening is that even like the galleries are really developing and demanding more stuff like from the artists. So then it also transformed into like a more professional scene as well, and the galleries are not now only they are not satisfied anymore like with this kind of, you know, young shows. So they demand much more. But in terms of the artist's journey, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, still the educational system in the art academy system is quite conservative in Turkey, and many professors are very reactive towards contemporary discourse. I mean, of course, like there's a strong public, small and strong public around contemporary art, so people, I think, tend to like learn and grow around. And if they have chance, like the next step would be either showing like in different initiatives and trying to move to the gallery level, or if they want a more like international visibility, they are like looking out for programs like Rijksacademie or HISC or some other studio programs like postgraduate residency programs for artists, like to develop themselves further. Actually, there are many
outside
artists.
of Turkey.
Yeah, there are many artists.
There's a
also,
problem
like
with that because there's a whole generation of Turkey. I mean, people like Cevdet Erek, for instance, who went to the Rijksacademie and then Ahmed came back. And then, so I think it's also it takes a long time to develop, to very gradually and change the arts institutions in Turkey so they become attractive places for artists to go rather than to seek to leave, to go to the Rijksacademie or something. Because Turkey isn't part of the European Union, and because of the huge financial crisis in Turkey at the moment, it means that affording to go to the Rijks or Goldsmiths or whatever.
That's where also Saha comes in at that
point.
Exactly.
But Saha can't fund every single Turkey.
I know, of course. But then there are not like, I mean, there are also you see that there are few names like who are more, let's say, ambitious, like to kind of gain for them to run.
I mean, I did talk to older artists who, I mean, one in particular, Ipek Tuben, who showed at the Biennale last year. She'd lived in New York for most of her life, 30 odd years. And she, because, you know, the Istanbul art scene is becoming so much more international, that none of those local problems, they're kind of drifting away, really. I mean, she moved back last year on 2012 because the art landscape had changed so radically in Istanbul. She felt that she could continue her career in Istanbul, whereas she never felt in the last 30 years that she could have really maintained her profile as an artist, as an international artist. So
I think
it's still not easy, but it's much more, of course, if you compare with her times, it's much more better, of course.
And also, you know, I do think, I do believe there are positives in, if you can look at it that way. You know, there is a sense, possibly, of greater freedom as an artist when you're not dealing with, you know, state funding by government, which places so many restrictions on you as an artist. I mean, you know, Turkey does have.
Okay, can I ask your fellow panelists what they think of that? Because I think it's an interesting point.
Because Turkey does have not just blasphemy laws, but insulting the state laws. And they're not just archaic laws, they are enacted. You know, these are live laws which are levelled against current musicians and artists. So I think that there is a greater freedom that artists are experiencing when you're not dealing with a fully developed democracy.
Övül.
Sounds like a contradiction to me.
Why?
Because I think that yes, of course, private money buys you freedom. Of course, private money buys you freedom.
Yes.
But I think you have to question whether you want that freedom. I mean, what is instituted by that freedom? Yeah, I mean that's an individualistic understanding of the way that a certain form of contemporary democracy works. Okay, which is the form of contemporary democracy that a politician like Tayyip Erdogan would proclaim as being the important type of democracy. Okay.
Well, I'm not a lone voice. I mean, when I spoke to Fulya Menci, the curator of the Biennale, she argued exactly the same. And I do feel, I mean, she's worked also in Ankara for several years, Amsterdam for several years, and which obviously, I mean, Dutch artists, there is no problem with state funding. I mean, it's a very positive in terms of state funding.
No, there are a lot of problems in the Netherlands about state funding.
All the funding was cut. Maybe we should.
Well, in Europe, we're experiencing austerity and cuts, but for the time that she was working in Istanbul, they didn't have
Amsterdam.
a problem.
Okay. Well, I think it's a problem. I'm going to open it up because I think that's a.
But it hasn't created that vibrant
But I mean,
scene.
especially like after talking about Gezi, I mean, I think Gezi is a very democratic reaction. Yeah. And I don't agree that after having Gezi, maybe before having Gezi, I could say that maybe we're not developed democracy, but I can easily say after Gezi that we are a developed democracy and we are a sensitive public reacting to situations. So I think this is like, I'm sensitive towards this issue.
They do have laws in place which restrict freedom of speech.
Gentleman at the back.
It seems to me that really one of the crucial issues is the neoliberal institution, or another way to say that would be the institution in the neoliberal economy. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the crucial blind spot, the argument that artists are free with private money.
Oh, I didn't say that. No.
Yes, you did.
No, it's between a rock and a hard place.
It endorses the idea that greater freedom of expression
Oh, no, I didn't say that.
Is better off under the custodianship of the private sector, i.e. the dismantling of the welfare state or dismantling of the state, dismantling the state as a representative of
I certainly wasn't
body.
suggesting it was some kind of,
But that's what's at stake with those sort of like kind of flippant comments there.
I made flippant comments. I said they...
That's what I thought you said.
They possibly... I said possibly they had greater freedom if they're not going to face... if possibly, if you've got a situation where there is state funding but with restrictions, then that isn't necessarily a better situation.
But aren't the restrictions of the neoliberal economy actually the obscene inequalities of the neoliberal economy?
Sorry?
Aren't the restrictions of the neoliberal economy
Of
exactly
course
the obscene
of
inequalities of the neoliberal economy?
I didn't mean to imply that it's creating this fantastic situation, but also the political situation has created a sense of urgency where really interesting and dynamic work is being made. I'm not saying it's great for the Turkish artist and look at all this private money. Absolutely not. I didn't mean to say it's fantastic. What I meant to say is that between the two, the state funding and the private, both possibly creating problems, then it's not going to... Often you will... There's the danger of restrictions being placed on an artist if there are sort of governmental restrictions placed on the artist.
Okay.
That was my point, and that was my only point.
Okay, so, but the question relates, if I may have a
You're going to ask a question.
Thank you, yeah. So the question is kind of directly related to that, and it's about like kind of the Istanbul Biennial, and it is about addressing the politics of art, or the politics of representation in contemporary art. And it seems to me that one of the major failings of the 2013 Istanbul Biennial was its failure to recognise its own politics of representation as a figurative member of the public, right? It actually endorsed that logic, didn't it? That,
why do you think so? Can you open up why do you think so? This is a
because
good point,
at the same time you've got Gezi going on, okay? So on the one hand it is like a protest against privatisation, but it's also a protest of privatisation along with like the endorsement of the government, right? Yeah, the government is pro-neoliberal. The government is allowing construction in Istanbul. Some people might call it corrupt. It might actually be garnering Islam back into politics in certain ways, right? Yeah. But the thing, it's a dual protest. It's a protest against privatisation and neoliberal institutionalism itself, including government, okay? Yeah. What's one of the major failings about the Istanbul Biennial then? By like kind of having the thematic as a public domain, as a political forum, it actually endorsed the discursiveness of that public space as being one of privatisation. It involved, and you know, Hito Steyerl hit the nail on the head when she likened, well, she didn't even liken, she just called the Biennial a museum, right, and asked if it was a battlefield. Well, yeah, she's right. It is a museum. It is now a space for classification and canonisation. But it's also a battlefield, but only within the terrain of neoliberalism itself. There is no way that it is involved in any discussion, any self-reflexive discussion about the politics of the state institution, about the politics of publicity itself, and the politics of also pre-1960, you know, the Republic of Turkey, and whether it happened or not. You know, the reality is that the constitution is there via Ataturk for a strong secular, publicly owned state. I mean,
but I would remind you that we have at the moment the constitution is still running Turkey, though AKP government promised to change it. It's still the old constitution brought by the latest military regime, which was like 82. So we are still governed by the same constitution.
Cool. Do you want to make comment on the kind of central statement?
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, being part of the team, of course, and like knowing the working conditions and everything. I think you're making an important reading in general about like the reaction towards the privatization structure. But I would say that like the biennial's failure is not really opening that discursivity of public space, like connecting and privatization. I mean, I'm saying this because Istanbul Biennial, never worked that way. In terms of a kind of, it was really, that was also what I was trying to specify in my presentation, that it was always, the biennial was of an urgent need at that point, like to develop the cultural scene a little bit further. So it has been only maybe after the involvement of Koç family. By the way, we should also like underline that Koç family has been manufacturer of artillery and also supporter of 80s military coup d'etat, which actually started the reaction of the protesters in the first place in 2009. So this is kind of a flow of the protests that missed Jens Hoffmann's and Adriano Pedrosa's biennial, because
well, they made that kind of funny
because nobody thought it was really relevant to themselves.
I don't think
so
anyone
they
knew
really
it was
didn't.
on.
They really didn't.
I think people were just not interested. It was completely apolitical.
They really didn't touch it. But of course, like Fulya Erdemci, being a very well-known Turkish curator, her involvement with public spaces from the beginning is very, very clear. She did already like the pedestrian projects before. Of course, it was very natural for her, like when she was selected as a biennial curator, that was kind of a natural thing that she would open the new developments of the public space in Istanbul to discussion through the biennial. That was kind of a clear fact to people who know about it. But I would say that the intention was even maybe much more, even I can say that much more naive on her part, that she never saw it as part of the privatized structure. For her, like she really wanted biennial to become a sort of like plurality of voices, critiquing like what's happening in Istanbul and basically using the biennial as a platform to maintain these discussions. And that was the main reason why Public Alchemy was produced in the first place. Yeah. So I think maybe you should also react to that, because that's an important point.
I mean, I think that the 2013 biennial was bound to fail. Yeah. I mean, as soon as you begin to try to, for reasons that I try to talk about in my kind of 5 minutes, as soon as you begin to try to instantiate a discussion about the concept of publics within a context where the naming of it is a political problem that needs to be challenged at all levels, at the levels of political structure that are, as you say, historical, but are also geopolitical, then you create a situation where you're bound to fail. But I think that failure, yes, of course, there was a huge amount of naivety on everybody's part, including my own as the public programmer, Who did I think I was to go in and say, oh, let me tell you about Habermas? It's like as a kind of content provider, I mean, I think that's, not that I would ever suggest that academics should withdraw from that. I think it's really important we learn from these situations, and I certainly learned a huge amount. But given all that, and given the amount of naivety, there are a number of things that are endemic in the biannual structure that mean that biannuals will just continue to replicate this mistake. We could talk about this for many hours, but I would say that endemic within biannual structure is A, an inability to learn from past mistakes, because B, curators are appointed to come up with a new brand every 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is, that C needs to be completely different from the last one, that D needs to be novel, so it needs to be, it's endemic in the idea of the opening. We go to openings to be surprised by a novelty, do you know what I mean? Which means that we cannot constitutionally say, I have argued in other contexts that actually, that next time we do a biannual or anything else, we should say, I just want to take up the baton from the last place and carry it on for a bit. And of course, we can't do that. Why
not?
The market demands otherwise.
We can do. Okay, so the implication is, for me...
It's subservient to the market, then.
No, the implication is... rather than, you know, what could Fulia have done in her situation that would have modified it, I think that we need to understand, and this is something that I've talked about a bit since my experience, we need to understand the mode of address through which we constitute publics in biennials and the mode through which we have an expectation of our publics to come to us and be prepared to be surprised and then go away satisfied. I think we need to recognise that as a political structure that needs to be changed, which means the logic of it is, jumping quickly to the end of a complex discussion, we need to really think about whether we need to carry on making biennials.
Okay.
Because biennials are a political problem and they formulate a certain relationship with the contemporary, with the market, that is entirely destructive of the political content that many artists want to suppose. So otherwise we're just caught in a loop, chasing our own tail and never being able to make any political formation.
Okay. Could the mic come down? Yes, gentleman in the... Thanks. We record these so people can listen to them online.
I better not say anything rude.
Yeah, blimey. You could have said that to me earlier.
I've got a quick comment to make, just to open things up a bit, mainly regarding the show downstairs. Could we not say that there's a dark side to all money?
Yeah.
Sure. So, for example, you know, recently during Britain's involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq, there was a big banner up across the Tate Modern saying "Free IYY."
Yeah.
As if like Britain was this champion of human rights, as it dropped bombs on the civilian population of the Middle East and sold arms to Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. So I'm just thinking about this Turkish art scene that we've been talking about, and I think there's the thing about Kutluk's controversy and the response to him. Could we say that Kutluk actually said something mature, and the response was immature? And I don't know. Maybe I'm going against what sort of this ethical high ground.
Well, when I read Kutluk's piece, I was amazed at the reaction to it. I was kind of gobsmacked. So, but the discourse is so polarised that you can't kind of get an equivocating, well, this and that, and there's a grey bit here. That was impossible.
I mean, the biennial is sponsored by a kind of oligarchical, I don't know, entity that was acquired its funds through the privatisation during the early 80s. I mean, you said that earlier, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, having this, again, ethical high ground, this moral high ground, you know, supporting protesters, when in fact maybe, you know, there's sort of the elephant in the room that's missing in all the discussions is the role of the military in Turkish history and how that's just not being discussed. I mean, there's very valuable environmental concerns, conservation concerns.
Well, we're discussing it a lot. I mean, I don't know how
is it
much,
because you can't actually...
How much of that discussion is... I don't know how much of that discussion is turned into translated into international discourse, but this is like a very major discussion. The reaction towards military, and actually I can easily say that all these works, like between 80s and like over 2000s that we are talking about, like a series of productions, all these artists were very much like responding to the military regime, and the nationalism and elitism supported that sort of Kemalism that was supported by the military by then to justify themselves for what they have been doing, not only to the Kurdish intellectuals, but also like to all leftist intellectuals, to far-right intellectuals, like really erasing a major cultural ground.
Are you talking about artists?
I'm talking about artists, and I'm also talking about intellectuals as well. Like there is like, it's kind of always a major like response, and this is also, this brings us to another like discussion, a political discussion. I don't know how much time and space we have for this. But
no, but it's just the connection between art and politics. And
well, I mean, what I want to say is like recently with the AKP government, like military has been quite like disabled in terms of like political maneuvers. Yeah. And the AKP government trained police, which is very much also in consistency with other neoliberal governments all around the world, trained the police like to take the space of the military.
So you've replaced one authoritarian system
exactly.
with another
So
authoritarian
when
system.
we thought, I mean,
his sorry to interrupt you, just quickly firing off a few things. I wouldn't defend him because I think he's quite clumsy. and quite difficult political. He's got some difficult political ideas. But could we give him credit for raising the standard of living in a way that hasn't happened before?
It depends who you're raising the standard of living for. There's huge inequality and huge poverty.
For the working class, for the rural poor. Has he helped them? No?
I mean...
He hasn't?
Not migrant communities, not ethnic minorities.
As far as I know, I mean, the city has been never transformed so radically at the time of this especially recent mayor. And all these groups trying to live in the city, in the center of the city, including Roma people, including trans people, they're all like forced to evacuate where they are living. Kurdish people, like there's this whole now regeneration project that started in Tarlabaşı district, which was a house to like the mainly cultural underground of Taksim. That what made Taksim actually in Istanbul. So
okay, one other point to interrupt. Sorry, just to quickly skip by.
Maybe a couple of other questions too. So
yeah.
Okay, no, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, we can continue private because this is really like intense political topic that we can discuss.
I'm just trying to get the.
We can continue also afterwards.
I don't want to talk about Erdogan or Turkish politics. I don't think it's necessarily the right place and time to talk about it. But I just trying to tie up how the artists have become obsessed by this subject. Maybe they're losing out on looking at things in another way, and maybe they're kind of playing to a Western audience by explaining Turkish politics, and maybe they could be saying something else. I know politics is incredibly important, but within art, I think it just seems, I don't know, the work seems to be tailored to explaining to other people outside what they're doing. You know, and I think maybe there might be something more.
I think this is rather harsh. This is a rather harsh remark on the scene, like where people really work.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's educational, and that's fine.
These two works that are not emblematic of the general art scene in Turkey. I mean, they're chosen. No. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think if you're going on this isn't.
There was a variety of works that you've shown that doesn't necessarily.
I honestly show 3 works.
People also, you know, I mean. As I was telling, there's a strong peer-to-peer sensitivity in the scene where people really check on each other, and anybody doing this sort of Western posing political problems to the other, everybody really checked on each other, and this has been harshly criticized also in the scene, inside. But these are of course discussions in Turkish, and they're not mostly translated. But we have these discussions inside.
Maybe somebody else.
Irony and there seems to be a dominant mode, which I think is a safe. Like the pop video of the rappers.
But you're talking from a knowledge of knowing lots of contemporary Turkish art.
Yeah,
okay. Did you think that was the dominant mode in the biennial?
I'm just talking about Turkish artists. No, not necessarily.
Right.
No. But there is that strand, and I'm just pulling it up. That's all.
Could I? Thank you. There's a lady at the back.
Well, I have one comment and 2 questions, if I can ask quickly. One of the comments is that Kutlu Ataman, in his interview, when he spoke about the protest and how he was siding with AKP government, he said that Koç family didn't buy one of his videos because he didn't participate enough in the protests. He wasn't out on the streets and he wasn't tweeting about it. So he thought that's the reason why Koç family didn't buy his artwork. And I guess that's why the interview was on AKP's side, which I found really interesting. And the question is, when the art market is so dominant, it's only private funding, do you think the art production becomes really market-oriented? And because you know who your collector is, you have a personal relationship with your funders, so you have all those people in your mind when you're creating work, and does it become like you're serving to them rather than being experimental and doing your own thing?
Well, I think that. Sorry, was that the end of your? Yeah. I think that again, as I'm constantly saying tonight, I think that that there are always artists that will serve their clientele, but I think that's true in every major city across the world. So I think that it's particularly true, for instance, in New York at the moment, and I think it shifts around. I think it was very true in the late 90s and early noughties in the UK, that there suddenly became a kind of utopia of money art that emerged, and one could see it in the private galleries, and you could see it transfigured into what is shown in the museums. And in the UK context, it came particularly around the convergence of a lot of new money, pre-2008 crash, being spent on art, a lot of money being spent by collectors on property in London, and the opening of Tate Modern. So it's a kind of confluence of a series of things that produced this kind of bubble whereby, after a couple of years, critics and theorists were beginning to say, hang on, there are lots of artists here who are just replicating, you know, the kind of what I would call the kind of Wade Guyton effect. Yeah, it's like kind of like, well, this sells, I'll make another one, I'll make another one. But that's always a kind of percentage of artists, and there'll always be a number of artists that don't work like that. Both the artists that have representation in galleries and those that don't. So there are many artists that have representation that doesn't demand that they produce in that way. And there are very important infrastructures of representation within the kind of global art market. And I think you can tell when you go into galleries. You know, there are certain galleries that are like supermarkets, and there are certain galleries that for instance, if their artists are offered to be nominated for the Turner Prize, advise their artists against it. Yeah? So there's a kind of quite a wide range of activity, you know, within the kind of culture of collecting at the moment. And I think, I'm sure the same is true in Istanbul. Yeah. And organisations like Saha are incredibly important. Oh gosh, are incredibly important
for creating a certain neutrality.
Exactly.
In that sense. Yeah. I mean, there will be. I think it's really up to artists. Of course, like as like having worked in the scene like actively for the last 6-7 years, I can easily say that like this is, or what you're saying is really up to the artists in Turkey. Also being in Istanbul, Ankara, and Diyarbakır, like how to respond like to this gallery structure and create the sort of discursive or reactive space, more like antagonistic space maybe around like the galleries themselves, like to provide a future for speculation, I would say. Yeah. This is very important, and there are artists like really more trying to develop and going on that, and having more underground reading groups and discussion groups, and like there was also a major discussion group called Orange Tent, which was formulated mainly of artists like discussing all these like issues regarding, you know, to the scene and how to produce the politics.
Yeah. And, can I ask just one thing?
Okay. One last question down.
And also, I was wondering if you received more people to the biennial this year by having it free.
Oh yeah,
of course.
Because I'm curious if, although it's public space and it's free to enter, I don't know if it's intellectually accessible to the like maybe the people who went there was gonna go anyways, even if it was paid for. So I was wondering if you managed to attract a new group of people who came just because it was free.
Well, normally the biennial over the past, I mean, obviously a biennial's audience develops, but this is quite an established biennial now. It's been going for 26 years. Normally the biennial receives about 90 to 100,000. I mean, normally, I mean, it develops visitors, and this one was over 450,000 visitors.
And I worked in the social media profiling of the biennial. That was kind of my main project for the biennial. I can easily say, like, it was very active in terms of responses that you wouldn't really like have in other biennials. Like, people were very active, or like talking about the biennial, having their pictures taken and having selfies taken in front of works and all this sort of stuff. But I think it was the also important thing was like that finally maybe Turkey realized like that actually there is a certain audience that's developed either through these discussions, either through curiosity, either through conflict. People were curious. They came to see the biennial, and they discussed it on various levels, like grandfathers, you know, mothers with and granddaughters, like this kind of families, and then they come. It was really amazing to see people queued in front of works to be able to see that. And there was even government officials. They even came because, especially for Halil's work, of course, because he was burning the flag of the main, like, how do you say, public housing company run by government, TOKİ, because he's burning in the video like this, and then there were people coming, like whispering in the ears of the officials, like there is kind of something going on there. And actually they were also saying that, I don't know, this is completely polarizing, I don't know why they said this, but they also said that it's rumored that they were saying maybe we should ask Kutlu Ataman like to produce a response for us. So, like, this also became a kind of public reaction.
Hi, yeah, sorry, just to ask one question.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, we're going to have to draw to a close. This lady after you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I kind of feel like a lot of like patronage and the idea behind it and the people behind it, the intention is kind of well-intentioned, whether they're kind of producing something good or not. And that perhaps all these things raised is like the problem or fault of all the people involved, like artists, curators, and all these people, for kind of not seeing the context it puts you in. Because I think about like the culture of things like the Evening Standard being handed out, and people just take it, and kind of any opportunity people lap it up without kind of seeing how it might alter those things. So I'm just kind of wondering if you feel like artists are being like spoilt by new opportunities.
Are they spoiled by new opportunities? I find there are artists, of course, like it's kind of it's a response like to the previous questions. There are some, and there are some like more like sensitive towards it, and there are some completely like taken by the vanity of the new scene, of course. But I mean, this is also a kind of hard-earned visibility for the young artists, like what we are discussing with all these institutions, having grants for productions or like sending people for their further education and stuff. I think there is also sort of sensitivity, people saying it. We call it tulip period. This is a particular period in Ottoman history, where actually Ottoman was getting a lot of borrowing a lot of money from European countries, but really having this kind of complete, luxury, very artistic like period that they had is called like the tulip period. So people are warning also each other towards like not to be drawn away by this kind of tulip like period, and then the infrastructure in that sense is really needed. But I mean, this is a kind of thing that time will show, I think, in a couple of years.
And I just to say very quickly that it's a tiny minority of artists that get anywhere near to the kind of comfort zone financially that might make them feel consensualized by patronage. The huge majority of artists, art workers, curators, gallery cleaners, interns are, kind of finding it really difficult to keep going. I think that's really important.
And we maybe haven't talked about the geography of Turkey, what happens in Istanbul as opposed to what happens elsewhere.
Sure,
which
of course. We kind of, a little bit like I tried to mention a little bit Diyarbakır, but yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering how openly and in what ways, or if at all, the big patrons, especially Koç and Eczacıbaşı, are openly showing their political sides, and how, and if that is the case, how does that translate into them supporting artists?
That's a question for you.
That's a question. That's a question for me. I have to say, like, there was a particular tension, especially around the biennial time, because İKSV run by Eczacı family has like really certain ground rules, like as a kind of family foundation. They were hesitating a lot, like to give some of the reactions. Actually, the curatorial team really demanded in extension of the Gezi discussions. And this is actually also partly because of, there are, I mean, one of the, maybe talking about the endemics, we really also need to talk about also, the structure of Istanbul Cultural Foundation in that sense, which has to be renewed and maybe updated a little bit, like according to the new needs, new urgencies of the cultural scene in Turkey, I feel. But yeah, there has been a difficulty in terms of the biennial, like this kind of, because there was some expectation from the curatorial team to make some more public statements, but of course, like it's a foundation didn't want to like make the relationships more tense in that
So they're
sense.
Careful about not supporting the government or not.
They try to be equivocal,
yeah.
and they try to remain silent because of that. Because also, I think maybe it's important, like to see Emek Theater's demolition also in that sense, which was also very much part of the protests as well, and which was involving Art and Culture Foundation as the major initiator of the Istanbul Film Festival and using Emek Theater as a major festival place. So this was already a kind of like tension that was developing between the government and the foundation, starting from the Emek Theater, and it kind of extended through the biennial. So there were a lot of like discussions extended and like having their public space around in the biennial itself.
And at that point, actually, the foundation actually got warned quite severely, didn't it?
Yes, and they were warned severely by the government too, yeah.
If you carry on identifying publicly in that way, then, and it was a very mild identification, you know.
Yeah, they were really keeping very, very careful, but then again, like, it was really a strong, reaction from the government.
Thank you. I think what we've illustrated this evening is just the complexity and the enormity of the subject and the many areas we haven't touched on. And something I'd like to just mention, I was lucky enough to make a whole series of studio visits, from which I selected Burak Delier. And that was some months before the biennial opened. But artists of very different generations and very different positions in their careers were all expressing to me a huge uncertainty about, although many of them said much of my work is connected to the issues that are coming up in Gezi Park and elsewhere in the demonstrations, but actually what I don't want to do is connect myself for the biennial, perhaps they've been invited to present work. What I don't want to do is overtly connect myself to it. I feel at the moment I need time to think about what's going on. Exactly. And I think I was in... and that, I didn't say this to any artist, but I would say that over 6 artists recounted that to me in different ways in just making the studio visit. So I think the work is extraordinarily rich in picking up on so much of what we've discussed tonight, but also many are still uncertain, of course, how to express it and what will come forward, as it were. So I think we've just touched on a number of things, but I'd like to thank the panel very much indeed for their different contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you for the good questions also. They were really good.
Thank you for coming. Our next event, please look at the website, but our next event is on Monday. Clifford Owens, performance artist, who will be here between 3 and 5. He's over from the States, just opened a new show tomorrow night at Corner House in Manchester, and we've caught him kind of on his way back. So if you'd like to, he's going to do a performative piece, so please do come to that. Thank you very much.